Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that you please take your seats at this time as the program will begin momentarily.
Reporting results. How do you report results, findings, interpretations, reflections, and your results of your study? So, first of all, some terminology. Typically, results is used in quantitative reporting, and you just describe the descriptives and the calculations of your data analysis. And findings is often used with qualitative data. But you should clearly differentiate between descriptions of your results and the interpretations thereof, which are typically done in the discussion. So, important for when you describe your and report your study is be clear about the purpose of your research, define and describe your variables and hypotheses before the data collection, and clearly describe your methodology. And that's the same for mixed methods, qualitative or quantitative studies. So in a typical quantitative study, this is a typical structure from such a report. So you clearly in the introduction describe the problem, why this problem is relevant, the background and related work. Sometimes this also becomes a separate section that you describe the work already done in the field. You clearly describe the method in defining the number of participants you had, where you recruited them from, your sampling strategy. You describe the procedure of an experiment or of your study. You give your materials, either the tests you've used or the experimental environments you used or any other material you used, and you describe how you analyze your data. In the results, you start with describing your sample, so biographical information about your participants. You give your descriptive statistics, and then you come to the inferential statistics. And then in the discussion, you give the interpretations of your results, reflections, relate back to related work, and of course your hypothesis. And you describe the conclusions and potential limitations of your work. Additional ingredients, of course, you should have the clear contact structure if you write with several authors. There are also normal agreements on how the authors list is sequenced. If all authors are equivalent, it's alphabetical order, or you have a main author at front. You need to write an abstract. I think a good procedure is to write the abstract at the end when you have an overview of your article. You really have your research questions and hypothesis clear, or hypotheses. And that's the difference. So in the research questions, these are more general. You talk about the variables. And in the hypothesis, you really talk about the differences and the impact of the independent variables on your dependent variables. You should have your references you use in the writing of a report clear. I would highly recommend to use a reference management system. I talk about that a little bit later. You should be aware of the citation standard for in-text citation as also for the references. And typically all your tables, graphics, additional materials you use go into the annex. But that depends on the journal or on the conference outlet you publish. So now what's specific about qualitative studies? I think for qualitative study reporting, it's highly important that you clarify the context of research. So where you're coming from. And this, of course, depends on the type of methodology and the research question you wanted to elicit and work on. So, but the reader should be able to understand the main problem in daily practice. So, another thing I often see in qualitative reports, that it's unclear how the transition from the qualitative data to any kind of interpretation, structures, or conclusions is drawn. So you must clearly describe how you analyzed qualitative data and how do you come to your conclusions from these. And best describe this. For example, if you come to a classification systems, give examples for the categories you get from your qualitative data analysis. So, and in a lot of cases, it's also very recommended to use a kind of validation system. Either you have a second coder in your analysis for your qualitative data, so you can do inter-rater operability, or inter-rater reliability, and you document that link and the validation of that link between the data and the conclusion. Especially if you have, for example, working with interviews, for example, with citations. Specific about reporting quantitative studies, you should, as also with the others, explain the relevance and of the research question. And I think it's highly important to have a very clear methodology reporting, typically about participants, so your sampling strategy, the procedure, the materials, and the data analysis you did. You describe in your results section from simple descriptives and sample characteristics to inferential statistics. You discuss reflecting on related work and on the hypothesis. So you should take all this into account, and you should also reflect on the limitations. And of course, it's also very nice to have some ideas about future work, how to proceed on your work from these. Typically for classical quantitative studies, you find very good templates and starting documents, and you should read examples of such documents if you plan to write an article. So when to write what for your report? I cannot strengthen it and put your attention to that again and again. While you do your study, keep a journal logbook or keep notes of what you're doing. For example, in the literature review, it's highly relevant that when you read the single papers or when you scan the papers, you should take notes in a kind of logbook. In the qualitative studies, you should, while you structure the data collection, you should really take steps back and reflect on what kind of data you actually need for filling in your purpose. You should play through if you get that kind of data out of interviews, or if you need more social interaction in focus groups or their like. In quantitative studies, it's very important to have your methodology and your variables clear, as also the instruments and the analysis plan for your data. So basically, before collecting your data, you can write all your data analysis scripts and have that ready. So when you now want to publish, especially also in a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary context, what is important before you write up your report? You should be very clear about the problem you address and your research questions, and for which community these are relevant. So what disciplines do you typically address? And then find outlets and journals that could be interested in that kind of work, or you're already embedded in a community, which of course is much better, as you already can start up with related work. For the outlets, you typically can search in libraries, or you get discipline-specific catalogs. There are not that much interdisciplinary catalogs, but the core question here is, what is your main contribution? What is the main result of your work? Is it a product? Is it some scientific design insight or some other? And how mature are your results? Are these early results? Are these really solid results that build on related work, and so on? And for the structure, I already said before, it's important to take into account the different characteristics of Do you write a report about a qualitative study, about a quantitative, or a mixed method study? How has the related work approached the problem? And probably how innovative is your approach? Did you really start up with something completely new? Or is there a lot of related work? Then you need to really think about what is the added scientific value of your publication. About reference management, as I mentioned before, there are quite some reference management systems out there. There are also underlying formats. If you work with TeX, you can use BibTeX. All the others are basically, you can import, export all your references, and you can also import those from the library when you do your literature review at the beginning of your work. So when you write up your document, you typically can integrate these with these reference management systems. And I think when you reflect on related work, I think it's very good already in the early phase of your work to collect good examples and outstanding ideas that stick with you when you read the related work. So in summary, document your research project while you work on it. Differentiate between results, findings, and their interpretation. So report the results. In the discussion, you interpret it. Use descriptive and inferential statistics related to your research questions. Are they appropriate? Do you have the right level of data? Use APA and IEEE standard formats, but this is given mostly by the conferences or the journals you want to publish in. And follow a common structure and describe the logic behind your study. Thank you.